Welcome to the next episode of the History of Russia. Today we'll be answering questions about the history of Russia, and Dana and Caitlin will be answering them. How did Alexander the Great modernize Russia?
Alexander the Great succeeded to the throne at age 36 following the death of his father in February 1855. This was at the height of the Crimean War, in which Russia had faced many defeats, leading the people of Russia to hope for drastic change. It was under the impact of this widespread urge that Alexander embarked upon a series of reforms designed through modernization to bring Russia into line with the more advanced Western countries. He had focused on the improvement of communications at first. At the time, Russia only had one railway, which totaled fewer than 600 miles of track. By the time he died, there was over 14,000 miles of railway in operation. This increase in railway construction meant for a general quickening of economic life in Russia's society. Joint stock companies and banking and credit institutions quickly developed. Next, the movement of grain, which is Russia's major article of export, was facilitated. Another measure of modernization that Alexander took was the abolition of serfdom. This brought in a drastic overhaul of some of Russia's archaic administrative institutions. These things, along with many other reforms and improvements, was how Alexander the Great was able to help modernize Russia.
What were the immediate consequences after the Russian Revolution in 1917?
The effects on Russia of the Russian Revolution were an end of autocratic rule, establishment of a socialist government, educational reforms, industrial growth and economic development, withdrawal of Russia from the World War, emergence of Russia as a major power of the world, and equal rights to all nationalities. The effects on the world of the Russian Revolution were the spread of communism in the whole world, increasing global tensions, blow to imperialism which caused a boost to freedom movements, and a division of world into two factions, communist and capitalist.
What were the main causes of the 1905 revolution?
There were short-term and long-term effects that triggered the 1905 revolution. The long-term effects were the terrible famine that had struck the peasants, which made them unable to pay their redemption payments. This caused a lot of ill feelings towards the Tsar because the peasants felt that he should help them. Another long-term effect was the industrial recession that happened after the Great Spurt. The upper classes were furious because Russia was almost wholly dependent on foreign loans, especially from France, which the upper classes hated even more because it was a republic. This crippled the Russian economy. Inflation rose by 40%, and there was mass overcrowding in the cities because of people flocking to the cities during the Great Spurt, and this meant that there was mass unemployment. The short-term effects were slightly different catalysts. One important one was the Russo-Japanese War. Japan ended up defeating Russia, and this created outrage in Russia that such a weak nation could beat them. On top of this, the army started to desert because of the incompetence of the Tsar. All these effects, along with other small incidents, caused great hatred towards the Tsar, and that ultimately led to the 1905 revolution.
Who is Joseph Stalin and why is he important?
Joseph Stalin was a dictator of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republicans, or the USSR, from 1929 to 1953. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union was transformed from a peasant society into an industrial and military superpower. However, he ruled by terror, and millions of his own citizens died during his brutal reign. Born into poverty, Stalin became involved in revolutionary politics as well as criminal activities as a young man. After Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin died, Stalin outmaneuvered his rivals for control of the party. Once in power, he collectivized farming and had potential enemies executed or sent to forced labor camps. Stalin aligned with the United States and Britain in World War II, but afterward engaged in an increasingly tense relationship with the West, known as the Cold War. After his death, the Soviets initiated a de-Stalinization process.
Explain the history of the Russian Federation.
The history of the Russian Federation officially starts in January 1992. The Russian Federation was a legal successor to the Soviet Union on the international stage. However, Russia has lost its superpower status after facing serious challenges in its effort to forge a new post-Soviet political and economic system. Scraping the socialist central planning and state ownership of property of the Soviet era, Russia attempted to build an economy based on market capitalism, often with painful results. Since the new millennium, Vladimir Putin has been its dominant leader. Even today, Russia shares many continuities of political culture and social structure with its Soviet past.
Who is the current leader of Russia now and what are his beliefs?
Vladimir Putin is the current leader of Russia. Putin began as an atheist, but after a car accident and a house fire, it caused him to question his views, and he is now a devout member of the Russian Orthodox Church. Some argue he is ushering in a new theocratic government in Russia. Putin's decade-long political career in Russia has endured the collapse of the Soviet Union and the transition of Russia into free market enterprise and democracy. He has many critics and at times seems antagonistic towards the West.
Briefly describe the Soviet Union.
The Soviet state was born in 1917. The Soviet Union was supposed to be a society of true democracy, but in many ways it was no less repressive than the Tsarist autocracy that preceded it. It was ruled by a single party, the Communist Party, that demanded the allegiance of every Russian citizen. After 1924, when the dictator Joseph Stalin came to power, the state exercised totalitarian control over the economy, administering all industrial activity and establishing collective farms. It also controlled every aspect of political and social life. People who argued against Stalin's policies were arrested and sent to labor camps or executed. After Stalin's death in 1953, Soviet leaders denounced his brutal policies but maintained the Communist Party's power. They focused in particular on the Cold War with Western powers, engaging in a costly and destructive arms race with the United States, while exercising military force to suppress anti-communism and extend its hegemony in Eastern Europe. After reforms, on December 24, 1991, the Soviet Union was dissolved. At the same time, Mikhail Gorbachev announced his resignation. The Soviet Union divided up into 15 separate independent countries. By international law, Russia was considered the successor state of the Soviet Union. This meant that it kept the nuclear weapons in the Soviet Union's seat on the Security Council of the United Nations. Many of the old Soviet Union states still have strong economic ties with each other. Some of the new countries have democratic governments, while others are still under authoritarian rule. One of Gorbachev's reforms was to limit the consumption of alcohol in an effort to reduce alcoholism in the Soviet Union. Boris Yeltsin was the first president of Russia after the breakup.